Before I start, I hadn't prepared anything, but I'm one of the people that Jonathan spoke about when he said that there are a lot of people in the room who view David Landau as their mentor. And he was that. And he was also a friend, and he was also an inspiration. And I think, first of all, that I'll just say a few brief words. I remember when David took me to work for my first job as a journalist at the Jerusalem Post, and on the wall there was an explanation of cricket to foreigners, which was even more inexplicable than the sport itself. And he read it out to me, and I still couldn't understand. And he put it there because he was so unabashedly proud of his British roots. And he, I think, brought to the newsroom, and through the newsroom, both at the Jerusalem Post and Haaretz, to the readers, he probably brought a lot more of Britain than they might otherwise have been exposed to had it not been for him. And I thought about him when I heard about the Brexit vote, that he would have had a field day with such a historic event. And he was the most incisive journalist I've ever met, and he was also the most passionate about, not only about Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but also about the profession of journalism. And so the combination of his incisiveness and his wit and his inspiration and his dedication, I think, is what made him an inspiration. And I don't think there's anybody who had a relationship with him, and you could have a very tempestuous relation with him as well, because he was volatile. I don't think there's anybody who that David touched who thought that this was just another run-of-the-mill relationship. Everybody remembers him as someone who was very special in their lives. Now we'll move on to the one-state, two-state stalemate, and we're not going to be talking about Scotland and England. We're talking about, although that would be interesting as well. I usually, when I moderate panels, I look up, I cheat. I go to Google and I write jokes, if there's a joke, because you're supposed to make jokes. So I wrote jokes about two-state solutions, and there are none, but there are hundreds of entries that say that the two-state solution is a joke. So we're going to be exploring that. The first official proposition that there should be a two-state solution, which was called a partition then, was made in 1937 by the Peel Commission. And the Peel Commission wrote, "An irrepressible conflict has risen between two national communities within the narrow bounds of one small country. There is no common ground between them. Their national aspirations are incompatible. Partition offers a chance of ultimate peace. No other plan does." That was in 1937. 80 years later, as Tzipi Livni mentioned, we had the quartet report issued this week, which repeated the same line. It says, "A negotiated two-state outcome is the only way to achieve an enduring peace that meets Israeli security needs and Palestinian aspirations for statehood and sovereignty." And the quartet warned that if things continue as they are, this prospect is becoming increasingly remote. But there are a lot of people who believe that the quartet and all the other advocates of two states are flogging a dead horse, that the two-state solution is no longer achievable if it ever was, that even if you see polls that show that the publics on both sides every once in a while support a two-state solution, they do so on the assumption that what they view as their essential demands will be met. And given that those essential demands are mutually incompatible, then it doesn't really mean that they support, that there is support. So there's also the perception that the leaders on both sides pay lip service to a two-state solution, while both sides are actively, what they do in words and deeds is to actively undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. So this is what this panel is about. First and foremost, Is the two-state solution alive or dead? Or is it in critical condition? Is it on life support? Which I think, as a minimum, I think we might agree. Is there any real one state? Usually we talk about one state. Is there any real such thing, or is it just words? And Tzipi Livni said that the status quo is unsustainable. That may be true, but I've been hearing that since I was in high school, that the status quo is unsustainable. So obviously it's quite sustainable, because it's been quite a while since I was in high school. So we have a very qualified panel to discuss it, and I will call them up. Israela Oron was a brigadier general in the IDF. She was the first female instructor in Israel's National Security College and a deputy national security advisor under Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. She serves on the boards of leading security, peace, and social justice organizations, including the Geneva Initiative. Daniela Peled is the managing editor at the Institute for War and Peace, which trains reporters who cover areas of conflict. She's also an editor and commentator, has written for The Guardian, The Jewish Chronicle, and she's also our, every once in a while, she's our colleague at Haaretz. She contributes. Sufyan Abu Zaida was the Minister of Prisoners and Ex-Prisoners for the Palestinian National Authority for 2005 to 2007. He has a PhD from Exeter University on Israeli attitudes towards Jerusalem. He currently teaches part-time at El-Quds and Birzeit. He spent several years in an Israeli prison in which he picked up Hebrew that was better than a lot of Israelis, and he became almost a superstar in Israeli TV because of his eloquent presentation of the Palestinian position, but also because of his support for the peace process. And I'll put it mildly, he's had a falling out with the current Palestinian leadership because of his criticism. Finally, Dani Ayalon is the chairman of the Hod Ayalon Consulting Limited and the founder of the social media group The Truth About Israel. He was deputy foreign minister and member of the Knesset from 2009 to 2013. He's the former Israeli ambassador to Washington, which is Israel's highest diplomatic post, from 2002 to 2006. He was foreign policy advisor to two PMs, or three, I'll ask him later, between 1997 and 2002. And like Sufyan, he is also a participant in many rounds of peace talks. So please welcome them to the stage. He says three prime ministers. So that's Barak, Bibi, Barak, and Sharon. I already told in the panel in advance what my first question would be. It's the same question to all of them. I hope I've begged them to keep their answers short. I hope they do. And Sufyan, I'll start with you. Do you think that a two-state solution is still possible?
I think the answer is not yes or no.
Excuse me for saying so, it sounds like a Jewish answer.
I know that. I know it's a Jewish answer. I think it's still alive, but in intensive care. Which means in the point of view of Palestinians, if we ask this question 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the majority of the Palestinians, more than 70% of the Palestinians, supported this solution, two-state solution. Last public opinion survey held by a Palestinian Research Center seen that only 49% of the Palestinians, less than the half, now supporting the two-state solution. Not because they don't want, but they lost the hope of achieving this solution. This is the point. But if we ask them, do you support another solutions, like one-state solution? Only 30% of the Palestinians supporting the solution, but the number going to be high during the time. Thank you.
In my opinion, the question is not is it still alive, and I do support Sufyan, that the question should be how much effort are you going to put in reviving the patient in the intensive care room. So I do believe when you look at the alternatives that we really don't have any possible alternative, and I can elaborate on this later. If we are talking about a one-state solution, and there are some people in Israel in love in the concept of some kind of a confederation, we need to talk about the possibility of living together in a one state, and what does it mean, and what are the consequences to the state of Israel and also to the Palestinians. So for now, this is the only hopes that we have still to keep it alive.
Daniela.
Well, the short answer is no, not really. A slightly longer answer is that doesn't mean that a solution is not possible and that a peace agreement is impossible. Unfortunately, when we talk about two-state solution, it's almost inevitably preceded with the words that you yourself use, paying lip service to. And I think there's a consensus that both sides and all sides are simply doing that. The two-state solution gets ever more remote, but I think so far today we've been talking about it as a concept that involves largely dismantling settlements in the West Bank. And I'm sure this is something that Sufyan can talk more about, but we haven't mentioned Gaza at all. So if a two-state solution is impossible, then a three-state solution is even more impossible. So a resolution that doesn't look at, doesn't look at Palestinian nationalism in a broader sense, and it also doesn't take into account Israeli nationalism, is doomed to fail. So I think what we need now is some political imagination that may move us beyond the two-state solution, perhaps not quite to the one-state solution.
Well, first of all, I will be remiss if I will not mention my encounter with David Landau, and of course it's great to have Jackie here. We've heard the angle of all the protégés here from the media, but my encounter was on the other side of the divide when David interviewed me for his book about Ariel Sharon. I remember sitting like 3 hours with him at the Moshava Germanit, I guess at his favorite coffee place, and having a lot of experience with journalism, I was kind of looking forward to awaiting, not patiently, to see how it will be reflected, what I said to him. And I was really impressed by the fact that not only the verbatim angle, but he really captured the essence and the spirit of the things that I said, and that really showed professionalism and honesty. And again, that's my 2 cents, if I may say so, but it's really great to have you here, Jackie. About the question, one or two state solutions, I think it's in a way an obsolete question, because I don't think there is a choice. It's almost the laws of physics that bring us into the only solution, which is a two-state solution. So the question is not one or two state solutions, but where will these two-state solutions meet? Will the border be the Green Line? Will the border be the Jordan River? Will the border be maybe what in the Golan Heights? What was not imaginable a few years ago in the Middle East is now imaginable. So the two-state solutions, again, where the Palestinian state, and I do truly believe in the self-determination of the Palestinian people. I do not believe that Israel should be occupying any other people. I certainly do not believe in, or I do believe, I'm a proponent of a physical and a political separation between us and the Palestinians. The question is where? And there are many, many imaginative solutions. I don't want to belabor too much. If we will have some...
But when you say where, do you mean outside
I mean,
either what Israel proper and the West Bank?
for instance, it could be in Jordan, it could be in some provinces of Syria, or it can still stay within where the population, the major population of Palestinians are in the 6 cities in the West Bank. But then we can go back to what Moshe Dayan talked about in the early 70s, late 60s, about a functional division, whereby you do not, of course, remove anybody, but those people who live in Hebron or Nablus or, will vote for their own parliament, which will be on the other side of the Jordan River. This is also a solution. So there are many, many ways, creative ways.
I think Ariel Dad.
Well, yeah, but I'm not professing about, unlike Ariel Dad, I'm not pointing out to one solution. I'm just merely looking at it from a pragmatic point of view. And politics, just diplomacy, is the art of the possible. And a good solution is better than a perfect, because the perfect is the enemy of the good, whatever. So I'm saying it could merely be either in the West Bank or in other place in the Middle East, in 2 different configurations. You see, because the Middle East is not isolated from global trends. And we do see global trends of disintegration of super state entities into more homogeneous entities. You can say in the recent history, it started with the breakup of the Soviet Union. You can go into Yugoslavia. You can do all the trends. You mentioned here Scotland, but there is Catalonia, there is Corsica, there are many, many other things. And of course, before talking about the breakup in the Arab world. So I do not think that the one-state solution is really serious, because no one can enforce 2 different people, certainly that are in conflict, to put them together under one roof. It has never worked, it will not work, and today the trend is completely different. You may have also about the one-state solutions, you can say, well, Hamas talks about a one-state solution. Ariel Dad talks about a one-state solution. And I don't think this will be feasible.
I just wanted a short-term answer about what Aluf said and wrote about Netanyahu's ultimate design. Do you agree with him in the sense that the Bar Ilan speech was just a tactic on the way to defeating Palestinian nationalism?
Well, I have worked with Mr. Netanyahu, although not for too long, 2 years, like 97 to 99, until Ehud Barak defeated him in the elections. And I can tell you, he was an enigma then, but less so. I guess the more time elapses, I guess you can see patterns. The short answer is that I do agree with Aluf. I think that Netanyahu is a very, very solid ideologist, given his personal history, but he's also a tactician. But he said just before the elections that a 2-state solution will not happen on his watch. I think we should take this very seriously.
Sufyan, I'd like to ask you, not exactly the same question, but a similar question about Abu Mazen, who you have criticized for other reasons. But there is a sense of a great disappointment in Israel with Abu Mazen's leadership. Even people who had hoped that he would be more forthcoming in moving a peace process forward, and even people who are critical of Netanyahu are realizing that what was said about him since Camp David is true, that he doesn't have the fortitude to really move things forward. So do you think that's true?
Can I say some words about what Mr. Danayalon said?
If it's
10 words. When he started to talk, I think Mr. Danayalon changed his mind when he talked about a 2-state solution. But I discovered he meant that I can move or establish my state in Jordan or in Syria on any place else. I think if I am using the same logic with him, I think it's easier to take back the 1 million, 2 million Jewish Russian coming from Russia to go back to Russia. It's
Well,
better.
I will certainly send one of them
It's-
there, back there.
It's,
Take it out of the product.
I understand you. Okay, I understand you.
You'd probably agree on that person.
What bad in Russia with Putin? For Jewish people. Why I have to move from my home in Ramallah or in Jabalia to establish my own state in Jordan or in Syria? Why to do that? It's easier.
Abu
My
Mazen.
solution. Regarding Abu Mazen, I am happy that the Israel is disappointed from Abu Mazen. Because if the Israel is satisfied from Abu Mazen, as a Palestinians, we have a problem.
But I'm talking also about Israelis who support
No.
a two-state solution. I'm not talking about the government.
Like
I'm-
Danny Ayalon?
No, like me.
Okay. Like you?
Yeah, like a lot of people who think that it's not that they don't think that Abu Mazen supports a two-state solution, but that he has not shown the kind of courage that is needed to achieve a two-state solution.
See, I think Abu Mazen is the last Palestinian leader who's still using the same terminology against violence. The only way of solving the conflict is by negotiations. He's against Third Intifada, and said he publicly. He continued to meet with the Israelis in spite all the criticism within the Palestinian people. He's still talking about peace in spite the disappointment of most of the Palestinians. In my opinion, Abu Mazen, as a leader of the Palestinians, is doing too much in order to return back to negotiation table, in order to find a reasonable solution for this conflict, establishing in a two-state, and we're not going to invent again the wheels. When we're talking about two states, we're talking about 1967 borders. We're not talking about Golan Heights, we're not talking about Amman. We're talking about 1967 borders. Palestinians ready in 2%, 3% to understand exchange of land. But as a principle, when we're talking about two states, when Abu Mazen talking about two states, he's talking about 1967 borders. Abu Mazen tried to return back to negotiation table. But I want to remind you that 3 years ago, when Israeli government frozen partially settlement activities, and they met with, Abu Mazen met with Netanyahu 3 times. Once in Jerusalem, second in Sharm, third, I think, in Washington. And the 3 times, they talked about resuming the peace negotiations. Netanyahu, during the 3, and you can check that, the 3 meetings, he only was ready to talk about security arrangements. Nothing else. Not about Bar Ilan speech, not about 2 states, nothing. Only, please, we want to talk about security arrangements. Once we agree about security arrangements, we can move to another issues. Abu Mazen logic was, see, tell me, please, where is the borders of Israel? Draw a line of the borders of Israel. in order to talk about security. Is the Jordan Valley part of Israeli borders? If yes, nothing to talk. If belong as part of the Palestinian state, okay, let us talk about security arrangements. If Shechem, Nablus, will be part of a Palestinian state, okay. You want to talk about, after that, about security arrangements? No problem. But tell me, please, first of all, where is your, not my border, not the borders of the Palestinian state. Forget that. Tell me, please, where is the borders of Israel in order to continue our negotiations? During the 3 meetings, Netanyahu insisted only to talk about security arrangements.
So just let me try to, what you said at the beginning, from your point of view, Abu Mazen has been too forthcoming, too eager to, or not hostile enough, or not, he should have cooperated less than he has? Is that what you were saying? He was being too agreeable to Netanyahu and to Israel?
In my opinion, from Palestinian point of view, Abu Mazen more flexible than the Palestinian expected from him.
Israel, I have 2 questions. One, if you would like to comment on that, in the sense that I know more about the Geneva Initiative, but everything there is concentrated on the Israeli side, or even though there's a dialogue and so on. So, just a statistical question: how do you, if I forced you to assign responsibility, who is responsible for the stalemate? Is it 100% Israel because it's the occupying power? Is it 80%? And then I want to ask you about, there's a new initiative by the Geneva Initiative to have a referendum. Now, this is a good time to ask whether this is such a great idea, given, one, that people who propose referendums don't always get the results that they think they're going to get, and 2, whether this is not in and of itself an act of desperation of people who have not been able to get the political system to do what they think is proper, so they come up with the idea of a referendum.
Okay, I will answer your second question. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure that I need to answer because you can see the response of the audience. I'm almost sure that a referendum will be a tactical move, and it will not change anything on the ground, and it will not change the situation of Israel, and it will not change the condition of the sick men in the intensive care. It's a PR thing, which I don't support, by the way, and not because of the results of the Brexit. And as to who is to be blamed, I don't want to blame anybody, but Facebook, okay, this is a good idea. Although I have the tendency to blame all the Israeli and Palestinian leaders, but it will not move us forward because they don't have the courage to take decisions, as Tzipi Livni said before, that will move our both countries towards the 2-state solution. And I'm sorry to say that the decisions are very difficult and somehow not very popular. Both sides, by the way. Abu Mazen is too afraid to take those decisions, and unfortunately, also our leaders, not only Bibi Netanyahu, but others as well. And I'm sorry to say that many of our leaders are taking decisions with regard to starting a war, and the risk is not a minor risk when you decide to start a war. And still they are doing those kind of, the issue of security is overrated. 3 of Israeli security leaders, recent, some of them had to resign, said out loud and in a very clear voice that Israel's security position right now is very good, better than it used to be before. So Israel is in a position that it can take, it is possible for Israel to take risks in the area of security. And territory is also overrated, by the way, because we are dealing now with security issues. The territory plays not a very important role here, and I'm sure that everybody knows what I'm talking about. So now it's only a matter of decisions of leaders. And territory and discussion about territories and borders is very important, but not in the sense of security, but in the sense of the West Bank and what are you going to do with all the Jewish settlements that are in the West Bank. Because not as Danny Ayalon, I believe that if you want to make a peace with another nation, you have, first of all, to see if there is a slightest chance that they will be moving from the West Bank or Gaza to Jordan. You cannot negotiate with somebody that you are not negotiating with. And the position of some Israeli leaders that think that we can dictate everything in the peace negotiation is somehow very strange to me.
In a minute. No, I'll ask Daniela first. Daniela, I want to get to the third solution, which is that there is no solution and therefore nothing changes. And the situation, as I said, it's been, there's been an occupation. We'll be marking the 50th anniversary next year. It's changed, and the nature of the occupation has changed, but it's nonetheless there. And you know, there's this theory of managing the conflict, that meaning that you have to improve the lives of the Palestinians, you know, take down roadblocks, allow them greater access, improve their economic situation. And you're somebody who has studied and who comes in touch with places in the world where conflicts are not resolved. So maybe this is really, I mean, we talk and talk and talk, but if we could have had exactly the same discussion 20 years ago, and 20 years have gone by, and maybe we'll have the exact same discussion 20 years from now. I'll be happy to take part in that. And that's it. And we're talking, but the situation will remain the same.
I have to disagree with you on that point. The idea that there's something like a conflict that is not resolvable is actually extremely rare. Wars come to an end, conflicts are resolved, not necessarily to the full satisfaction of all the parties. I think one thing that holds back resolution of this particular conflict is the sense of exceptionalism on both sides, that somehow this is a uniquely awful conflict, uniquely irreconcilable. And I have great sympathy for that, but what you find is that anybody involved in national struggle, in division, in lengthy conflict, everyone thinks that they are uniquely maligned, that the media bias is uniquely against them, and their problem is uniquely unsolvable. I don't think this is true. I mean, Danny mentioned Yugoslavia. 20 years ago, there was a terrible war in Bosnia. 100,000 people died. Acts of genocide, the worst violence in Europe since the Holocaust. Well, the Dayton Accords ended that, a hugely problematic agreement. And what we have now in Bosnia is very far from joyful coexistence in Kumbaya. It's a dysfunctional state, the economy struggles, but for 20 years there's been no outbreak of political violence, and that is after genocide. So I don't agree that it's that there's no solution, because the status quo or a stalemate implies that the situation remains static. It doesn't remain static. It absolutely doesn't. As far as the international community go, as far as movements that Haaretz has discussed a great deal, boycott, divestment and sanctions, which so far and in the future is unlikely to have any kind of economic effect on Israel. But as far as Israel goes in the standing in the community of nations, as far as Israel's brand goes, and as far as Israel is seen by the diaspora and the rest of the world, that isn't going away. And that is one of the small incremental effects of an unresolved conflict.
By the way, I just want to disagree. I think that Israel has faced tougher times in the international arena. 1970s, after the oil boycott in 1973, when the United Nations passed the Zionism is Racism resolution, and when people were becoming angry with Israel because of the oil embargo and the fact that they had to stand in line for hours, I think our situation was much worse then on the diplomatic level than it is today. And then I also think that there's some ambivalence about diaspora Jewry, as we heard from, at least from Ariel Eldad, and I think that in this thing, contrary to other things, he represents a kind of attitude that the people that are critical of Israel are going to be lost to intermarriage anyway, so it's not as if we're contributing. That's my... Danny, first of all, if you want to dispel your... being cast here as the extremist with a go ahead. And also I'd like to ask you about the imposed solution or the outside interference. I don't know. I don't think I'm revealing a secret to you, even though leftists don't like to admit this out loud. That there are a lot of leftists that if you tell them, well, the United States or the United Nations or France is going to come up with a solution, and they're going to say, this is what you're supposed to do, and you do it, and that's not something that we would reject because, no, the sides have to negotiate it by themselves. So why is that not, and let's assume that that is what happens, and the government is forced to, both sides are forced to do, why is that bad? In 50 years, nobody will remember how the solution was achieved, if a solution is possible, I'm assuming. So if you could relate to both of these.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say that,
shortly.
Yes, I did not speak, Sofian, about removing any Palestinians from the West Bank to anywhere else. I just said, one of the solutions could be that they will be inhabitants of where they are, but they will vote someplace, they will be citizens of the Palestinian state, which may not be congruent one-on-one with the territory. And I certainly do not believe on removing any of the Palestinians, like I do not believe in removing any of the Jews. So it's, I think there is a balance there. Now, about a forced solution. I would say that part of the problem is that, and why many Israelis do not take criticism, whether it's from the Jewish world or from the UN or other countries, with great credibilities, because the process in a way is lopsided. And if you look throughout, let's say from 93 on, and you see how the Israeli position has evolved under both sides of the political divide, Likud and Labor, you see that Israel moved, I would say, not just halfway towards a compromise, but 93, 97% towards the Palestinian demands. But at the same time, if you look at the Palestinian position from 93, Sofian, until now, they didn't budge an inch. You wouldn't see any difference whatsoever. And I am not a political supporter of Bibi Netanyahu, but since Sofian so eloquently made the case for Abu Mazen, I would like just to say, in fairness to Bibi Netanyahu, it takes two for a tango. So Bibi Netanyahu did freeze settlements for 10 months to no avail. He did speak about the two-state solutions, and he did speak about, a recognition of Israel as the national home of the Jewish people by the Palestinians, not in Hebrew or English, but in Arabic, which I think is not a too high of a toll to ask. And when Abu Mazen says that in 1,000 years he will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state, that raises suspicions. We have recognized in the Oslo the right of the Palestinians to self-determinations. I think we should ask, at the minimum, for reciprocity. And our DNA is Jewish. And I think Tzipi Livni also mentioned that it's not just a religion, and I believe it's ethnicity, it's nationality, it's a whole culture. So when you talk about an imposed solution could be viable if the leaning of the international community on the Palestinians will be equal as it has been on Israel, in the sense that just as they ask Israel for freezing settlements and other things, they could do the same thing with the Palestinians about recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, about what euphemistically, and I say it, called the right of return, that the Palestinian will reject or will forego the right of return before the negotiation. Just as Israel is demanded to have some payments done before negotiations, I think it would be well advised to do it vis-a-vis the Palestinians on security issues, on incitements, on right of return, and of recognition issues.
I'll ask just one more question of Sufyan, and then we'll open it up. But Sufyan, please do.
The same question about enforcers.
Okay, but also don't answer his.
No, I'm not answering him.
But also, I want to know. Well, if you want, speak shortly about. And also, I want to know, from your point of view, if there is no two-state solution, if it's the political leadership isn't there, if it's not happening, then what?
Enforced solution. I just thinking why enforced solution worked in Bosnia Herzegovina, why it worked in Kosovo,
Because there weren't Jews in Palestine.
why it worked in South Africa, in spite the Israelis hated to compare Israel with South Africa case. But why in South Africa worked a solution? In my opinion, we can discuss here and come next year, hopefully, and after 10 years or 20 years, asking the same question and answering the same answer about two-state solution, one state. We, as a Palestinians and Israelis, since the beginning of the conflict, tried in a different methods how to solve the conflict without international intervention, without enforced solution. Enforce the Israelis and enforce the Palestinians to accept an international solution. I think we can meet another 10 years, after 10 years, talking the same things. Now, why I'm saying
Short, because I want to get to the audience.
Oh, Netanyahu, nobody can enforce him to draw the lines of the Israeli borders. Nobody can enforce him now to freeze totally all the settlements activities. Nobody can enforce Israel to withdraw from the 1967 borders. On the contrary, they continue building settlements in these lands. Which means no solution based on two states. Okay. The Israelis don't want to think about one state solution. Palestinians, most of them against this solution. Stalemate is not serving anybody, by the way. Palestinians suffering, and the Israelis also continue suffering. It's a lose-lose situation for both sides. So I ask the international community to come and to enforce solutions.
Same. We don't have much time for questions, but we'll try to take 2 or 3.
Hello, thank you. My name is Jerry Clare. Danny, this question is addressed to you. Your thinking is disingenuous. It assumes that the Israelis and the Palestinians are on equal sides of the negotiating table, but they are not. Palestinians live under oppression. So it is not a question of, oh, but Netanyahu said, we'll freeze the settlements for 10 months, and it was to no avail. No, the fundamental issue is oppression and occupation. That is what must be addressed. Palestinians must be free. They must have equal rights.
Well, the answer to that
was very passionately.
is we are not talking about an academic issue, but about reality on the ground. And you can say, well, it's a matter of oppression and occupation. I would say it's.
What do you mean he can say? You don't agree that it's occupation?
Wait a minute. I will tell, if you are asking me my political thing, wait until I decide to run. But others may say it's a matter of a consistent Palestinian refusal back from 1937 or before to accept a two-state solution. And I can tell you, the narrative, which is not very much talked about, is that many Israelis, whether they're on the center or the left, are still believing very, very, very much in their heart that if Abu Mazen, the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, is not for a two-state solution, but a one Palestinian state. And not by what they say, but what they do. And by what they do is the incitement. If you look at the curriculum in the West Bank, not in Gaza, they're talking about a one-state solution. They're talking about the rights not over Judea and Samaria, but over Tel Aviv and Haifa and the Tabor Mountain. You say not, but you have to realize what is the reality. So what I'm saying here is that the responsibility for occupation, yes, I would say it, occupation. The reason for occupation is not necessarily a desire by Israel to control over other people or to have a territorial buffer, but it is a result also of the Palestinians not accepting any territorial compromise, including the one that Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert gave to both Arafat and to Barak. So again, to say that it's only Israel, it's not right. And this is why I...
Yes, over there.
Thank you, Jerry Lewis. Very briefly, I never understood the problem that Bibi creates. He keeps on saying he wants to have unconditional talks. And the next sentence he says, but the condition is you recognize a Jewish state, etc., etc. And the other question is simply, if Abbas is such a wonderful person, if he is, and that's open to debate, can I use the expression, what happens if he gets run over by a bus? Who takes over then? And will that not make it much harder for Israel to negotiate? Thank you.
I'll answer your first question because he has made it clear that this is not a precondition for talks. The demand for recognition is it's a precondition from his point of view to an agreement, but not for opening talks. Sufyan, what happens when Abu Mazen gets... Oh, well, in the end, he's going to go, you know, one way or another.
You know, last week I wrote an article answering this question in Arabic. Because we have lots of debates within the Palestinian society, legally and politically question. If anything happened to President Abbas, or if he one day get up in the morning and decided to resign, for instance. We have a problem, a legal problem and political problem. Legal problem because regarding the Palestinian law, if president of the Palestinian Authority, because this reason or another, disappeared, stopped to function, the Speaker of the Palestinian Legislative Council taking responsibility for 60 days. During these days, 2 months, Palestinians holding elections for presidential The problem that we haven't legislative council since Hamas took control in Gaza. The Palestinian parliament doesn't work. We haven't a speaker. The speaker from Hamas, and most of the time he under administrative arresting in Israeli jail. So legally, we cannot filling the gap with the Speaker of the Legislative Council. Any other solutions, it's illegal. The second problem, that President Abbas has many key jobs, not only as a president of the Palestinian Authority, he is the head of the PLO, he is the head of the Palestinian state, he is the head of a Fatah party. So when we start to think about this issue, we're not talking about replacing President Abbas with one person. It's illogical. So sometimes Palestinians thinking about dividing.
Sufyan, if I can interrupt, and we're just running out of time. The question, I think, is how can Israel, never mind who succeeds him. By the way, some of the things you said, I thought you were talking about Bibi. He's been, he holds a lot of job and he's been around forever. The question was, why should Israelis think, and please answer this very shortly, that the person who will replace Abu Mazen will also support a two-state solution?
I think all the candidates mentioned in the media, including Marwan Barghouti, you mentioned in Haaretz article Friday, all of the candidates, we're talking about supporting the two-state solutions, all of them. So you can be quiet. The problem, not Palestinian problem, it's Israel problem.
I'd like to apologize, first of all. We didn't leave enough time for questions. You can grab these people if you have questions, and thank you very much.